Audience, welcome to Viewpoint from Overseas. Today I have a very special guest with me. Is Dr. Professor Adil Najam. He is a Pakistani academic and intellectual who serves as the inaugural dean of the Ph.D. School of Global Studies at Boston University. And nowadays he is the part of the advisory council of Prime Minister Imran Khan. So Dr. Saab, how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you very much.
So Dr. Saab, I have sent you some questions, very specific questions, and I am going to start those questions regarding whatever is going on in the region. So, Pulwama attack, first question. Pulwama attack is one of many which has been happening, which we are seeing, and the similar reaction from India, from Pakistan. But there is a problem, Dr. Saab. The problem is that all the time the same thing rhetoric comes from India, and very similar rhetoric comes from Pakistan. No, we did not do, these guys are at their own, Pakistan state not involved, yes, come sit down and talk, and things like that. And I don't have to go over it. However, the problem lies when the associations or organizations inside Pakistan claim the responsibility of that. And then Pakistani Prime Minister and Pakistani officials come on TV cameras and say, okay, give us the evidence, otherwise. Why? I mean, if I'm third party, I would say, why don't you first go arrest them, start questioning them before asking these questions? Dr. Saab.
So, first of all, I think you are right that there is a routinization of this. At the same time, I think we should recognize, and irrespective of where we are from, that the magnitude of this attack and number of people who were killed, in this case Indian forces, was so large that both for its human loss and for its political impact, this is not just another attack. And that explains, I think, part of the immense reaction both in India and in Pakistan, the reaction to India's reaction. That is thing one. Thing two, I think you're also right that because this is routinized, it's kind of become like a script that both countries have. And not just both countries' governments, but their people, their media have, that you immediately get on this hype, you immediately get on this jingoism. And what is tragic is that in all the finger pointing, there is no one, I think, who seems to be serious about finding a solution on any side. And I would again say with great heavy heart, it doesn't seem that there is anyone in the world also who is interested in finding a solution to what is now one of the longest standing unresolved disputes in the world, international disputes, which is now 70 years old. That's thing one. On the gist of your question, it is slightly more complex than that. In some ways, an organization has taken claim, but that organization has taken claim from within Kashmir. So now we also know that these organizations and how these claims happen, we've now known this from a lot of Taliban claims and so on and so forth. This is not like a corporation that says, a CEO comes and says, I did it. And this is not to say that they may not have, but evidence is needed. I think we would also note that the Pakistan government has in fact taken action against the offices, not of this organization, because this organization officially does not exist in Pakistan. It is illegal in Pakistan. But one of the organizations that might have sprung from this, which has an office in Bahawalpur, and their action has been taken. So I don't think that we should be looking for good guys and bad guys and easy answers on this, because there are none. There are none on either side. But I think the big point really is, and I say this as a human being, not as a Pakistani, not as simply someone who studies these things. This is an immense, ongoing 70-year-old conflict that none of the sides seem interested in solving. And one of, I think, the great tragedies to me is, as soon as these things happen, it becomes about India and Pakistan. The rest of the world, to the extent they care only because they have nuclear armament. And meanwhile, there is this place called Kashmir, divided between the two countries, which is larger than many countries in Europe, for example, where the tragedy continues. So I really think in some ways, I wish the United Nations and the great powers of the world were to sit both countries down and say enough is enough. We need, so for example, on this, instead of the blame game, India saying you did it, Pakistan says you give us evidence, why not have an international commission of the United Nations come and say we will investigate? We don't trust either of you, and both of you agree that whatever we come up with, you will agree to. In my capacity, in my sense, I would tell Pakistan, if that were the case, I would advise Pakistan, take the deal. Let there be an international investigation, and whatever it finds, let us act.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me my friend Sabahat also. Sabahat, with your permission, if I can have one very short follow-up question to Dr. Saab. Dr. Najam, you say that I do agree with you. I mean, it's not as simple that somebody took the claim, somebody claimed the responsibility, and we should take action, or that means anything. Of course, I do agree with you. However, that we start taking actions when the heat start growing, and that always happens. Now, now it is being said that it is not due to FATF, we were always doing it. But when previously, a lot of quote-unquote liberals like ourselves, when we talk about it, we were labeled as, okay, you guys are cowards, you just lying down in front of them. But nowadays, they're doing the same thing. Please comment on that attitude of the state.
I won't comment on the liberal part because I have lost faith in that word. I don't know what that means. It's simply a label of division. But I think your general point is correct. And I think it's a very unfortunate part. That these issues come up only after a tragedy or after a calamity or after an attack. You know, whether it is APS, which is in Pakistan, whether it is this, whether it is Balochistan, whether it's the Hazara community, something terrible happens. And then suddenly the whole machine operates and media starts saying things and Twitter gets overheated and so on and so forth. And these things happen with such frequency that if we were serious about it, we would be doing things in between, because the period immediately after the calamity is the worst time to do anything, because you can do very little. The best time is to do, and the same is true on the India side. So I do think that this is an issue. It's also related, for example, to the Pakistani argument very often becomes that the world doesn't believe us, that the Indian propaganda, so-called, is against us, and that's why we get a bad rap. If we do get a bad rap, then the time to change your image is not after a calamity. It is in the same period. So I do think those actions have to be taken. But at the root of this is that these are difficult questions in a divided society. The very fact that you had to preface your question with liberal, non-liberal is a testimony to the fact that we are a divided society, as is India. And if we are a divided society, then these questions are very difficult to answer, because each side of that divide thinks that their answer is the right one. And if it is not their answer, then the other person is a traitor. Right? So whether you are on the liberal side or the non-liberal side, there is this sense that the other side is somehow, if not a traitor, is somehow less than you. And that is not a condition in which the type of societal support that is needed for the tough actions. Right? Again, let us forget about Pakistan for a moment. Let us go back about 70 years to the First and the Second World War and what was happening in Europe, which was very similar, divided societies. Why is it difficult to take action against such groups in any country? Because society is divided.
Polarization, basically.
Right? The polarization. So you have to start with Misbah Sahib, you and me. Right? Not simply by saying that other group of Pakistanis is wrong, but somehow building that identity and sense of common purpose. And I think you are right, that common purpose is not there.
Sabahat.
So, Adil Sahib, I wanted to see whether we can get beyond, like you said, there is now a script. Certain things happen, things move on. Is there, and do you see anything that is different this time? Because let me relate my experience. What I am seeing, especially on the Indian side, is that within their society, they now have a lot of people, they have the usual, script that you laid out happening within India. But there are at least two things that are happening that are very interesting. One is this backlash, one good, one bad. One is this backlash against Kashmiris, right? There has been a lot of mistreatment and, sort of treating them badly. And that, first of all, that is, to me, and I hope to a lot of my Indian friends, laying out the problem within the Indian myth about this whole thing, right? Because there is now a lot of Indians that are coming out and saying, hey, do we just want the land? We don't want the Kashmiris. What is going on here? So there is some of that happening, and a lot of Indians are starting to question and step up and speak against the myths. And I'm not saying myth in a negative sense. I'm not saying the Indians have a myth and we are all true. No. Every nation has its own myth, both the national myth and the myth on specific issues. That within India, and to give them credit, I think part of it is because India itself, that thing I've heard you say as well about India maturing as a world power and coming into its own and being a little more self-confident within society, they are now having some parts of their society question the national myths. So there is some of that change, and you go in and out of Pakistan. I would like to ask you whether you see any of that happening within Pakistan, or are we still a very controlled and polarized society? What do you see there? Because you're in Boston, you run into Indian intellectuals, you run into our people. What's happening? What is I don't even want to say hope. What is the change this time around? Do you see anything fundamentally changing?
No, some things haven't fundamentally changed at all. They are the same for 70 years, but right. I do think that there are some things that have changed. One thing that's changed is that the government in India is Mr. Modi. Mr. Modi is a very polarizing figure in India itself, and he has this is not about Pakistan, this is about India. He has polarized India more. His politic is a politic of internal polarization. That is where he derives his strength. And it's not just him. That is a global trend in many countries, including right here in the United States. Right? So that is a difference. The second difference, I do think, is time. And with that, every incident is different. Yes, when I was much younger, I was slightly more optimistic because I wanted to believe that with time, a certain generation of Indians and Pakistanis who remembered partition, who remembered the horrors of partition, I thought we were the problem because their memories were so filled with anguish that they couldn't find a solution. They couldn't see a solution. And I thought, okay, maybe when that generation passes and younger generation come, they will be less angry, they will be less polarized between the two countries. I have been proved totally wrong.
Although I would jump into that and say that it isn't just the first generation, right? Just like the Holocaust, the children of Holocaust survivors, the children of partition are still affected by it. It is going to be the generation after yours and mine that gets to where you're talking about.
In this case, because the two are very different in other ways, in this case, the memories have fossilized. So the older generation who had lived partition might have had memories of horror, but they also had memories of living together.
Right.
The new generation in the two countries don't have that memories. All they have is the nonsense that is spewed on the television.
Right.
And
the other
that comes, right? And so the other becomes a cardboard. Now that worries me. So that does not. I hope you are right, but I do not think that there is a significant number of people every time, and this time in particular. I think the space for sane voices decreases, especially in India, because the jingoism increases. The media is, including social media, is very belligerent. It attacks anyone who tries sanity, and we've seen that a lot. So I think the space for sanity has unfortunately been shrinking. Now, again, I don't want to sound biased, but I will, but I do think this is a real thing. I think that space has shrunk more in India at this point than in Pakistan because of Mr. Modi's internal divisive politics.
So, but just as a last point, I'd like to express go ahead, sir. Sorry.
One very brief thing. Again, I'm not trying to be defensive. I think it is because at this point, Pakistan has so many other internal problems that for many Pakistanis, India is no longer the most important belligerent we have.
Right. So there is that. And I guess I would actually point out the positive aspect of what you just mentioned about Mr. Modi. Just like Mr. Trump in the US, polarizing society, I feel it's actually giving some of the Indian, I know you don't like the word liberals, progressive radicals, some space to operate, because now there's enough people that are not on the same page as their government, and therefore they have some space to talk to each other and speak out against their own government. Because otherwise, with Congress governments and the United National myth, I've always felt growing up that the Indian myth has such huge inconsistencies within itself that if anyone with an open mind looking at them would say, but 1 + 1 is not 3, whatever you do. Right? And I know, I think I'll throw it back to Misbah Sahab here. I know we want to also talk about some of the regional implications of this within Pakistan, both in terms of, the Saudi role. I am very curious to hear about, and I know we get a little defensive about this whole thing about Balochistan in Iran. And my fear, and I'd like to hear some real information about this, is that thing where Saudi Arabia and Pakistan seems to be getting on the same page, and it seems like the Trump administration, the Saudi administration in Pakistan are getting the band back together in terms of what happened with the first Afghan-Soviet war, because they seem to be all, in that loose coalition where their security interests are the same. Is that coming out against Balochistan? And I am not in Pakistan, I don't have first-hand information, but I can very easily believe fanatics within Pakistan now starting to act against Iran, because there is that anti-Shia element. So I don't know what Misbah wants to pull up on that.
Actually, I'm glad you started this conversation. So, Dr. Saab, I am going to further go into that, and as Sabahat already mentioned, that I will add some other aspects also. Now suddenly, first of all, the former Prime Minister, twice in his Prime Ministership, had Indian Prime Minister walking on the Pakistani soil, but both time it was failed. And first time it was failed because military was not happy. Second time this Pathankot incident happened, and then it was all gone. And it was being told that, Nawaz Sharif is running too fast and this and that, and everything was totally... So I would like to have your comment on that, do you see that was really a wrong move from ex-Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, or it was something could build up there? Second thing, let's come back to Mr. Mohammed Bin Salman's visit. You may have read the recent article by Mr. Abbas Nasir in Dawn, where he is claiming that President Trump wants to have nuclear power plants in Arabian countries, and everything is kind of connected there, and he suggested that Pakistan should not take part in anything of any side of this thing. So kindly enlighten us on these 2 points, please.
So, Dr. broad questions. On the India question and walking on Pakistan soil, I have a feeling, I have no knowledge of this is speculation, that the current Prime Minister of Pakistan would love to get a visit from Mr. Modi. I think if it doesn't happen, it will be mostly because of Mr. Modi. I also have a feeling that if he were elected again, he would very much like to come and you will see a very nice visit and buses and flowers. Yet visits are visits, right? We shouldn't, whether it is Mohammed Bin Salman, whether it is Modi, that is how diplomacy happens. One visit doesn't change relations. Sabahat had earlier said, we are on the same page. These countries are not even on the same book with each other. Page though is a very different thing. And I'm talking whether it's India-Pakistan, whether it's Pakistan-Iran, whether it's Pakistan-Saudi Arabia. These are very complex, divisive relations that are not going to be changed by and should not be seen through the lens of one visit or two visits. Right, so that is on that. And
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Saab, but the thing is that if there is a visit, then it starts building up on that. And if we come out and cancel everything that this is not the right thing, then things would not happen. I do agree with you. Then visit has no meaning.
100% agree. I have always been of the view that the worst thing you can do is not to talk. Talking does not mean agreement, but not talking turns into disagreement. So, and the people that you have issues with are the ones you need to talk the most.
Of course.
So, and nor should a visit, so I'm now moving to the Mohammed Bin Salman. I don't think, there is sometimes, in the Pakistan commentary, there's this sense that because he visited and because he was given this horse carriage ride,
Beautiful rides.
Somehow they live happily ever after. That is stage management. That is how diplomacy happens. When Nixon went to China or Reagan met the Russians.
Gorbachev, right.
So similar photo ops. Photo ops is photo ops. Let's not read too much into that.
No.
But that's remind me of the second part very much.
No, actually, Professor, I would like to jump in there. I am not talking about us being in some sort of brotherly long-term relationship. In fact, I am talking about the opposite. The American relationship with Pakistan, whatever the propaganda we grew up with, or even the Saudi relationship with Pakistan, whatever we talk about, and even people like me growing up, we had this idea of democratic norms and liberal ideals. What we have come to, at least I have come to realize, is these relationships are purely transactional. When Pakistan was needed for the Afghan war against the Soviets, Saudi Arabia and America, and they had this one transactional interaction, you might want to call it, or engagement, you might want to call it. That's what I'm wondering about. Are we headed for another transactional engagement between these three powers?
I get it, and I think Misbah Azam's question was the same with the nuclear. And they are transactional, and let us be honest, they are transactional on everyone's part.
Right.
They are transactional, not there's no victim in these relationships, because they are not relationships. And especially when you are weak, then the weaker you are, the more the less your options are. Right? That's what strength does. If you are economically strong, if you are politically strong, you have more options. And when Pakistan is weak economically, then it is going to be more easy for other countries, whatever those countries are, to be able to get Pakistan to do things. Now, on this thing with the US, also realize that the relationship between Pakistan and US is a very different relationship. We are not chums. We are not even pretending to be chums.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
And that
never were.
The leverage that the US might have on Pakistan, which I'm not even sure, that has also varied over time. But at this point, it's not as if Mr. Trump is going to say something and Pakistan is going to jump up and say, yes, sir. Right? So I think the nuclear question that you pointed out of nuclear energy is an interesting one. I do sometimes think that that may be reading too much into it. I do not suspect that was the primary reason for Mohammed Bin Salman's visit. That conversation has been happening in the US media and the US circles quite some time, and there's a lot of concern in the US. And there's a lot of concern in Europe because there's a lot of concern in the rest of the Middle East. What that means. Now, there is a particularly close relationship right now between Mohammed Bin Salman and the Trump family.
Right.
Yes.
And that's the context. I would, again, in all humility, say I think Pakistan is a bit player in that conversation.
So, but let us bring it down to Pakistan then and ask the bigger picture. Because when I remember in the Zardari days, some of us were watching him almost change foreign policy or reach out to Iran, for example, and China and reset some of those relations. Do you see a new, and maybe we can close on this, do you see a new direction in Pakistani's policy? Is Pakistan starting to come back to taking some agency in its own policy, in reaching out, maybe, or, and this is completely Pollyannish, finding a balance between America and China, Iran and Saudi Arabia? Are we, because it seems like there's all sorts of weird interactions happening.
So one slight comment, and that's a really good question, so I want to tackle it. The slight comment is, we should be, I think it would be very arrogant to think that we can be the balancing act between...
No, not balancing act between them, but for ourselves, balance within our own policy.
Our worry should be not to be in the crossfire. I think our worry should be not to be in the crossfire. You are living through literally historic times in that there is a new great power emerging, i.e. China. There is an existing great power, the United Nations, which is not doing as well as that doesn't mean it's tilting time, but certainly not a sole superpower. And I think we are in the midst, in one of those small players in between. On the good side, to be at least positive, I do actually like the fact that Pakistan is again taking diplomacy seriously. I've been a critic for a very long time. Right. Pakistan didn't even have a foreign minister. Yeah. And I think it is good to see people visiting. I think it is good to see our leaders going. That is the role of diplomacy that we should be talking. Right. Finally, one sentence, Mr. Azam, if I can. I think that I don't know what Pakistan's foreign policy is emerging as, but what I do hope we are seeing is that in the turmoil of the world, every country is trying to figure out, position itself to multiple other countries because no one knows how these cards will fall, nor does Pakistan. Right. That is why Mohammed Bin Salman came to Pakistan. It's not just that Pakistan needed something from him. He needed legitimacy from other countries.
That's true.
From a major Muslim country, right?
Yeah, and that is very true because after the Davos in the desert, he did not invite Pakistan, but after Khashoggi's incident, he invited Pakistan. I fully agree with you, Dr.
There is this conversation as if there is some secret deal, and what will we give? What we had to give in return, we have given. We have given him legitimacy. We have given him a great welcome. So and at this point, he needed that.
Yeah. So Doctor, let me ask you as a closing question, like a two-fold question to you here. First fold is that, do you think that is all Saudi Arabia wants, or they want more than that? Because they asked military from Pakistan and they did not get. So they want to have something in return. Second thing is that India-Pakistan, where you see we are heading at.
And you want quick answers, don't you?
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Azam, the first thing, everyone wants more. Right? Everyone wants more. Even if you and I were negotiating over selling a car or buying a car, we would want more. So, obviously, I'm sure they want more, but that doesn't mean that they will get more. Every country is going to ask, including Pakistan, wants more. Pakistan probably wanted more deals and so on and so forth. So every country will ask for more. The question for Pakistan is what is in our interest. I think we did demonstrate in the initial Yemen question that we have the ability to say no, despite very heavy costs. And I think, and I hope, the public message, at least in the visit, was that Pakistan did not want to get tied up in Saudi Arabia's meddling. So, for example, there is a tussle between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and I think the only right thing for Pakistan to do is, we are out of it. This is not our fight, we will not take sides. Now remember, Mohammed Bin Salman did exactly the same thing in India. Right?
That's
he didn't go and buy their bait, India wanting him to say that Pakistan did it, but nor did he say, take Pakistan's bait and say to India, you are wrong on Kashmir.
That's correct.
His message was, not my issue. Pakistan's message should be, not my issue. So, do they want more? Sure, they want more. Everyone wants more. Bangladesh wants more. Nepal wants more. Brunei wants more. Pakistan wants more. our question on foreign policy is what do we want and what is best for the people of Pakistan.
No, you just wanted the India-Pakistan.
No, actually, I just want to finish it at this moment. But see, my concern is only that we had very little in our hand to say no to the powers like that, especially in the economic crisis like that. And that was my whole concern. So thank you very much, Dr. Adil Najam. It is very enlightening, like always, to have you in our show. And thank you very much, Sabahat, for joining us. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am your host, Misbah Azam. You are watching Viewpoint from Overseas. Thank you.